with greetings from Pennsylvania Conference, Pastor Gibbs, Carlos Charnichart, and all the rest of the staff there. They think highly of you and the work that Pastor Monterey is doing here. So, praise the Lord. I want to tell you just a quick story as to why I believe this scripture text that you have just heard read to you. The story goes like this. I was raised Adventist. I was baptized at a young age, but I didn't have a real good concept of God. Not my teacher's fault. It's going to be on me. But here was my thinking. I was in either the Bethlehem Church or the Allentown Church visiting. This was back years and years ago, probably 30, 35 years ago. And one of the speakers got up front, and you know the difference between preaching and meddling, right? All right, here's what he said. He was doing a stewardship sermon. He said, you should be tithing on your gross income before you take out federal income tax, local income tax, state income tax, every other kind of tax you could think of. Well, as soon as I heard that, I wasn't doing that, obviously, and the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up straight. You've heard of the book, The Great Controversy? It's not just a book. The Great Controversy is a war that goes on between my two fingers. And if you put your hands to your head, it's the same war that goes on with you. There's a war between good and evil. Now, I will tell you that I was not happy with what I heard him preaching. I called it meddling. This was back in the late 70s, early 80s. I knew that this was wrong in my head, and I was angry. Matter of fact, I was so convinced that I was right, I took it to God in prayer. Now that's the safe way to handle a controversy that you feel going on between your temples. Take it to Him. He's big enough to hear it and to handle it and to correct you if need be, or correct me. I had this plan in my mind. I said, I know this won't work because back in the day, I knew in England, Great Britain, the top tax rate there. Does anybody know what their upper tax bracket was for people who earned a lot of money? 90%. So I said, okay, Lord, I said, let's just use this as an example. You bless me abundantly, and I make $1 million in a year. Now, do I do that? No. Okay, but that was my scenario to God. $1 million. Government would charge me how much? 90% or $900,000 tax. Now you see why the rock and roll musicians left England, went to another country, lower tax rate. Sports stars, same thing. They flee from those kind of high taxes. And then I said, Lord, I know what the 10% amount would be of $1 million. I was feeling pretty smug. Okay? And I said, that would be 10% of $1 million is 100,000. Now, that's 100,000 to tithe, 900,000 to the federal government, England, and that leaves me how much to live on?
0.
You're good mathematicians. You're right where you should be. That's correct. So I said, Lord, it doesn't work. Now praise the Lord that He still wants to communicate with hard-headed people like me. Italians are that way a little bit, so forgive us. But a question formed in my head instantaneously. And the question was so direct, I couldn't help but answer it. The question was, Al, where do you live? Well, I live in the United States. I don't live in England. So I made the promise to God right then and there, Lord, I will pay tithe on the gross until I go bankrupt. And I meant it, because I was sure that that was what was going to happen. Does anybody want to guess, when I started tithing the gross like that, what God did to my family income that year? He did what? How much? Right? Well, he might do it for some. He might do it 100-fold. Okay? But for me, he doubled my income in 1 year. And I said, how do you do this? I didn't go bankrupt. You've heard that text, O ye of little faith? I put in my Bible, O thou of little faith. Because I saw that he has power to, you can't outgive God. You just can't. You can't. All right, so now you understand a little bit about why I believe that text that we read this morning. Believe in the Lord your God, and you shall be what? Established. That means you'll have roots in that area. You'll be firmly planted. Believe his prophets, and you shall prosper. That's God's prescription, his RX for prosperity. Now, I'm not suggesting that you just do this to get rich. That's not the point. The point is, if we do these things, God will naturally do what he's promised. His promises are sure. So I'm going to read a couple of Spirit of Prophecy quotes. Anybody have heard of Spirit of Prophecy in this church? I should ask, how many people believe it? Believe in Spirit of Prophecy? Well, I see almost every hand go up. I'm going to read some things that might cause the hair on the back of your neck to go up a little bit or make you a little upset. Don't be upset with me. Just read what I'm telling you on your own when it's quiet time and see if it's correct. And see if it's the way you understand it. Here's the first one. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 753. You don't have to write these down. I'm going to leave these quotes behind. Pastor can make some extra copies if you don't have them. Plus, we'll be giving them out at the other church tomorrow. 753, first paragraph. All that man receives of God's bounty still belongs to who? God. That's what it says right there. Wow. Still belongs to him. Then there's another quote. You've heard of the testimonies to the church, haven't you? This is the fourth testimonies, page 391.1, first paragraph. Many. How many?
Many.
Many are going directly contrary to the light which God has given to his people. Who's she talking to? Us. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Italians speak with their hands on it. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we're going directly contrary to the light which God has given to his people, she says why? She says because they do not read the books which contain the light and knowledge, and cautions, reproofs, and warnings. So what kind of books is she talking about? Her books. Testimonies, Conflict of the Ages series. It's been given to us as a gift. As a gift. Another one from 1 Testimonies 199, second paragraph. This one ought to scare you. I hope it does, because when I first read it, it terrified me. It says, I was shown, this is Ellen White saying, I was shown the awful fact that Satan and his angels, who? Satan and his angels have more to do with the management of the property of God's professed people than the Lord has. Did I hear somebody say, uh-oh? Yeah. Frightening. Let's see what she's talking about. Maybe she'll make it a little clearer to us as to why the enemy has more to do with this than God himself for his people. Fourth testimony, page 42. Let it ever be kept in mind that the present selfish system of disposing of property is not God's plan, but man's device. What's she talking about? What's the selfish system of disposing property? Anybody know? Oh, somebody got it. Through the will. Last will and testament. You've heard of that. So she's saying that there's troubles here. Now let me read a little more that will help you zero in on this. And again, don't get mad at me. I didn't write this. Okay, but God gave it to his servant for our blessing and our prosperity.
Amen.
This one is from 3rd Testimony, page 121.3. Fathers who selfishly retain their means to enrich their children and who do not see the wants or needs of the cause of God and relieve them make a terrible mistake. The children whom they think to bless with their means are, what with it? Does anybody know the word?
Cursed.
Somebody's read this. Cursed. I don't want to curse my son, and I hope you don't. Does this mean that we can never give anything to our children? No. There are exceptions. I'm going to read one exception, and you see how this fits in your family. This is from 3 Testimony, page 118, 3rd paragraph. Parents should have great fear, she says, in entrusting children with the talents of means or money that God has placed in their hands, unless, here's the disclaimer, unless they have the surest evidence that their children have a greater interest in, a greater love for, and a greater devotion to the cause of God than they themselves possess. So if you're sure that your children have that relationship with God, then you're safe. If you're positive that it's not the case in your family, then what you're doing may become a curse. Now I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn some time over here to Bonnie that we have left. She says that there's something that Ellen White says about a will. Ellen White talks a lot about this subject because, number one, it's important. The will and the test of law. Bonnie?
Morning, church. Same to you. The answer's found in one of the places in Adventist Home, page 387. She says the will should be made in a manner to stand the test of law. Now, when you think of law, first thing you think of is lawyer, right? I've heard that there are people that just do not like attorneys. I don't understand it, but apparently they're out there. How many of you are do-it-yourselfers? Love to do projects? Do they always turn out the way you like them to? Or is it like our house once in a while where things kind of turn out not exactly the way you planned them? Yeah. Back in Ellen White's day and in the early 1900s, many wills were written without the regards of what the law said. And she says in her time, not 1 in 10 wills met the test of law. Not 1 in 10. The ones that were drawn under what she called competent legal advice did, but those do-it-yourself things just didn't work. They were written in good faith, but they did not work. So, what do we need to do here in Pennsylvania? There's a few criteria. You need to be at least 18. You need to be of sound mind. That usually means that you know what you own and where you want it to go. It must be in writing. They don't do oral wills in this state anymore, and it must be signed at the end of the document in front of 2 witnesses. That's the skinny on how we do wills. Now, We've heard this morning a little bit of the counsel that Al's read for us on where our funds are supposed to go. And there are things we need to provide for our children. We need to provide for them a home that models Christ's love. We need to provide them with a good work ethic to teach them that it's okay to honest labor for your paycheck. And you need to provide an education that they'll be able to provide for themselves as well as for society. There's a quote in 3 Testimonies 122. She says, "It is better to assist your children to help themselves, much better than to leave them a large amount of money at your death. Children who are left to rely principally on their own exertions make better men and women and are better fitted for a practical life than those children who have depended upon their father's estate." So parents, we have a job. We need to provide a foundation for our children spiritually and educationally and with skills that will allow them to provide for themselves as they serve God. Real quick, I had a client that came into my office that was not a Seventh-day Adventist woman. She had 3 children, one of whom were mentally challenged. And she had recently discovered that her child needed longer care and more intense care and wanted to redo her will to provide for that. Well, she got kind of hung up in a lot of little nitty-gritty details, and she never got the will signed. One morning, I heard on the news that there had been a police incident, and they named the town and the city and the street, and I realized that that was the town and the city and the street of that client. She had been murdered by her son, not the mentally challenged one of the other ones. The point of that story is she never finished the job. She never got that will done so that her own will governed, not the one she wanted. Her church didn't get the money she wanted to leave it, and the child was not prepared to be cared for in the manner in which she wanted to have him cared for. So, if you are considering doing new documents, prayerfully consider what God would have you do, and then, to borrow a line from Nancy Reagan, just do it. The will you do today may not be the will that is in force when you die. Why? You're going to change it. As your children age, as your economic status changes, as the tax status around us changes, you should redo the will. Do you know what the average estate plan is in America these days? It's called intestacy. Legal word for have no will. 60% of America has no will. We are not going to be part of that statistic after today, correct? Right. One way or the other, we are going to provide for the assets God has placed into our hands. Now, lest the young people here, the younger families here, think we're only speaking to the more mature members of the church. We're not. I've had young people come into my office and tell me, I don't need really to do a will. I don't have any assets. I just have debt. I have student debt. I have a mortgage. I have a car payment. May I suggest to you young people who have children that you have one of the most precious assets you will ever have, your children. And you need to make preparation for them should something happen to mom and dad. Another quick story, I had another single mother come in and had 3 children. All had different fathers. None of the fathers were in the picture. All 3 children were mentally challenged, and she was going to set up a provision to take care of them. She had a very close friend who lived with her and who cared for her children while she went to work. She was determined that she was going to leave everything to her friend, and her friend would care for the children. She had placed the home into her friend's name. She had insurance policies that named her as the beneficiary. We chatted multiple times about what would happen if she left everything to her friend. You understand that when you're left something, there may be a moral obligation to care for someone else, but there is no legal obligation to care for someone else. She understood it, so she thought, well, I'm going to change the beneficiaries on 2 of my insurance policies, actually 3 of her insurance policies. We found out after she died that she managed to change the beneficiary on only 1. I was left with $25,000 to care for the kids. The friend got the other larger insurance policy, and the 3rd insurance policy was never in effect because she had never paid for the premiums. But you know, she also had a really good pension. She worked for the New York City Transit Authority, and at that point, it was back in the 90s, her pension was worth over $300,000. You know who got the pension? Her friend. Do you know what her friend did with it? She took the money and took off. I was left with a home that went back to the bank and 3 kids that went into foster care because she didn't plan, in my mind, correctly to care for her kids. So when we talk to you about being good stewards with the funds that God has given to you, choose carefully who manages and cares for your assets, but also choose carefully who will manage, care, and raise for your children. If you're looking for some guidance, a great place to look is Volume 4 of the Testimonies. It's a chapter called Wills and Legacies. There's also Volume 3 of the Testimonies, a chapter called Wealthy Parents. Now, Al's already said you think we might be meddling, and possibly, I don't know why you would think that, but maybe you would. Volume 4 of Testimonies, page 479, she says, many manifest a needless delicacy on this point. They feel they're stepping on forbidden ground when they introduce the subject of property to the aged, to an invalid, in order to learn what disposition they want to make of it. But this duty is as sacred as the duty to preach the Word of God.
Amen.
Real quick, there's a parable in Luke 12:16. I won't bore you with reading it. You all can read it for yourselves. The bottom line is there was a very rich man who his barns were, he was so blessed his barns were full, and he had to tear down his barns and build new ones. And he was very self-content because he had riches and he took care of himself and he was going to have a life of ease. And God looks at him and says, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Here's the important part. Then who shall these things be which you have provided? Who gets all this stuff that you have labored for, that you have been blessed by God? What are you going to do with it? Question for you. When you die, how much are you going to leave behind? All of it, absolutely. All of it. So the question is, not how much you're going to leave behind, but what are you going to do with it? Will it have a lasting influence for good, or will it be a negative influence? There's 3 places that you can basically provide for your assets to go when you die. One's to your family, your minor children. Al's already shared with you some guidance from Spirit of Prophecy as to how to determine how that works. When you get home, you can read 3 Testimonies 121. It's a big paragraph, and because of time, I won't read it, but read it. It talks a lot about how you are supposed to deal with some of those funds. How can you benefit others? Can you benefit through your local church, school, academy, and ministry that you love? Let me tell you a story. This is not one of my clients. It's a lady by the name of Osceola McCarty who was born in 1908. She lived with her aunt and her grandmother in Mississippi. And when her aunt came home from the hospital one year and her aunt was unable to walk, Osceola quit school at 8 years old. She never married. She never went back to school. She started work as a washerwoman at 8 years old. She washed clothes for a living. She washed, I don't know how many of us remember, maybe on the History Channel, seeing the scrub boards. Yeah. That's how she did her washing. In the 60s, someone had told her that maybe she wanted to try an automatic washer and dryer, and that lasted for a couple loads, and she said it doesn't meet the standard that I do, because she would boil each load and then rinse it 4 times, hang it on a 100-foot long line, and when she was done all of her washing, she started ironing. And she ironed till 11 o'clock at night. She started when she was very small, saving money, a few pennies from each load that she had washed, and she stashed them in her doll buggy. And when the doll buggy couldn't hold anymore, she took herself down to the bank and had the bank people help her open an account. She made no withdrawals, only deposits. And when she was asked why, she said, my secret was contentment. I was happy with what I had. She retired when she was 87 years old. You want to know how much money she had in the bank? And we're talking 1950, 60 money. She had over $280,000 in the bank that she would save penny by penny from the wash that she had done. She gave that money to the University of Southern Mississippi. She set up scholarships for worthy but needy children. She started each morning on her knees saying the Lord's Prayer.
Amen.
She said, the more you serve the Lord, the more able you are to serve Him. And she said, I'm proud that I'm leaving something positive in this world, and my only regret is that I didn't have more to give. Think what a tremendous gift that was to the children in Mississippi. Think what would happen if that happened here in Pennsylvania. Think of the children that could be educated in a Seventh-day Adventist school to absorb Seventh-day Adventist values. Think about how many children they could branch out as missionaries, not only throughout the world, but in Pennsylvania, because we need missionaries in Pennsylvania as well.
Amen.
What a difference that would make in so many lives. And there is a third place your money can go. If you don't make the right preparation, your resources could go to enrich the U.S. Treasury. And I submit to you, neither you or your family will get a thank you note. So think about it, pray about it. If you have a choice, and you do have a choice of where to leave your resources, to your family, your church, the ministries that you love, or the U.S. government, I don't think it's a tough choice to figure out what your choice should be. We are told to be wise stewards, so that even after we die, we will leave behind a legacy of faithfulness and obedience that will continue for generations or until the Lord comes. The officers of the Pennsylvania Conference strongly support the things we've been talking about this morning. They feel so strongly about these things that they want to help those of you who want to leave a gift to the Pennsylvania Conference. Your church school, the academy, your local church, some entity with inside the Pennsylvania Conference. And for a limited time, the conference is providing those documents at no cost to you. So you've already heard several times this morning, but you're all invited to the seminar tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at Waynesboro. I had to think where I was, thank you. And I know there was a sign-up sheet. We've left some information out there. We've left some contact information so that if you can't make it tomorrow, that's okay. We actually have cell phones that work any place that we go. Please call us if there's something we can do for you. But remember 2 Chronicles 20:20. Believe in the Lord your God, and you shall be established. Believe in His prophets, and you will succeed. And don't forget Luke 12:20. Whose shall these things be? Will you join me in singing our closing hymn this morning? It's hymn 100. Great is thy faithfulness.